Rerratic Studio presents Washington Black by E.S. Ayadujan. Chapter 4. Chapter 1, 2 and 3 are linked in the video description. Please note that this is a summary.
That night, the night of William's defilement, when Big Kit and I were asked to report to the great house to wait at the master's table, I first encountered him. This request seemed odd and scary because a field slave was a black-skinned monster born for arduous labor and not someone who belonged inside. We had no idea why the master had made the request. What did he think of us? Over the hours, Kit's desperation had transformed into a wordless rage at what she was unable to do to me and herself. She started to worry that the master had learned of her true intentions and that he intended to punish us severely and cruelly. Emmanuel and young Amy Lee, dressed in crisp white and gray pajamas, waded towards the cluster of cottages and called for us. Indignantly shaking her head, Kit got up from where she was sitting on a stone in front of our cabin. She said, "Don't you send Wash up there. I go. However, you ignore the boy." Emmanuel declared, "The master he clear. You both." Amy Lee greeted Wash with a timid hello. I said, "Hello," as my face warmed up. Emmanuel said, "They eat before it becomes dark. You should get up now. Don't keep them waiting, either." In all of my childhood, I had never made my way to the master's veranda through the frangipani-shaded forest. I followed Kit up the slope at twilight and experienced the stones and cold grass for the first time. Kit regarded the mansion with a stony gaze. Doors were wide open. My throat muscle fluttered, like if I had just ingested a moth. I once crouched underneath the large laundry chimney and craned my neck to look up its chute at the square of sky beyond and the passing clouds. However, the ceiling here looked higher, and at the top was a gigantic glass dome window with a long rope of dim twilight light down to the ground. The air was thick with dust. I saw thick burgundy drapes, carved scrollwork above the doors, and plush green chairs hunched over on gracefully curled legs. I thought it was quite gorgeous. Big Kit nodded and said, "A lovely, fine quiet. Listen. We were too dirty to enter, and we had insects in our hair as well as sweat and dirt-smelling feet and clothes. We remained uneasy as we stood. We were unable to return to the huts since we had been called, but we were also unable to knock on the door to let someone know we were there. We exchanged intense looks. The house porter, Gaius, eventually rounded the corner. Since Erasmus Wilde's arrival, he had been sent out to the overseers more frequently with orders, so I got to know him better. Gaius was as ancient as driftwood, tall, and frail. He made methodical, unhurried movements, and because of this elegance, all of us in the huts were drawn to him and, in turn, made fun of him. He had previously been attractive, and one could see a hint of a regal demeanor, a man raised beyond the commonplace, in the prominent cheekbones and clean forehead. He had the accent and upbringing of a white guy, so in my mind he was a type of substitute master. I dreaded him. He was cold and rigid. Yet not cruel. "Hello Catherine, good evening. Youthful Washington." Big Kit said hesitantly, "Gaius. Emmanuel and Emily have come down to get us." She stumbled. "For what does he want us?" "The master. He is the one. Did Emmanuel fail to inform you?" Big Kit placed a sizable palm directly on top of my skull. She was tight, and I could see she was afraid of the master's fury. "He told us to wait on his table." Gaius frowned as he cast a wary gaze into the dusk, as if there may be someone else waiting there. "Then you must do it," he instructed. "I'm certain he has a motivation. The kitchens will be your waiting area until you are summoned." We both remained still. "Our feet," Kit finally said. Gaius fixed his gaze on the mud that covered our naked feet. He cautiously unbuttoned his jacket, pulled out a sizable white handkerchief from the inside pocket of his waistcoat, and handed it to Big Kit. He said, "Clean your feet. The two of you. Both of you will regret leaving tracks on his stone." He turned and escorted us into the vast hall once we had cleaned off our feet. We exited the chilly marble on the opposite side and stepped onto parquet flooring. I had never before seen angles of wood braided together to form such a wonderful design. The air was crisp and fragrant with mint. My worries started to fade a bit. True, Big Kit didn't feel comfortable. To bring these delights back with me to the huts, though, I wanted to see and memorize everything. White lace, silver candelabra, and wood polished to such a glossy brightness it resembled freshly baked bread were all there. We passed through chambers containing towering, antique clocks, tawny-clawed odd frozen animals, and carpets from long ago. I barely dared to blink as I continued to gaze. "Is it true, Gaius?" I muttered. "Those creatures?" Gaius paused to take a look at a large, white owl perched in an alcove. Its eyes were yellow and were blind. It remained still. He whispered, almost inaudibly, "They were once living. They are currently stuffed and lifeless. The master remains constant. He was once alive." I muttered. Gaius halted and fixed me with an enigmatic look. He flashed the tiniest of smiles just as I was about to assume that he would turn away. "So it is claimed, Washington the Young." I was aware of Kit's fierceness and explosive might. But as she moved around Wild Hall, she too appeared weak, intimidated, and uneasy. More than the frozen creatures in the hallway or the weird, shimmering luxury all about us, it was the change in her that alarmed me. Gaius led us farther inside the house, and I hastened to follow. Finally, we made it inside the kitchen. It was a huge chamber with boiling silver vats and a shimmering wall of fire. Maria, the cook, suddenly turned to face us, her sleeves pulled up and her face covered in flour. In the rear, two maids were squabbling over a big container. Despite looking among the piles of gravy-stained plates, gusts of flour, and big wooden blocks containing pepper and yam cubes, I was unable to find Amy Lee. A huge fire was burning in the large open fireplace, and a shiny bird was cooking while gently rotating on its chain. I gaped in awe at the wealth and experienced longing, something I had never experienced before. Maria snapped, "Don't you even do that, nigger," as I glanced at a platter of pastries by the entrance. I was startled and glared at her in horror. Something softened and changed in her face. She continued in a softer voice, "The time for it is later. You may lick at the leftovers while you're cleaning up." "So," I asked. Gaius said, "But only from touched food, only while you are scraping their plates. Eating all of the fresh stuff won't do." I looked up at Kit in awe and exclaimed, "We get to lick the dishes." When Big Kit and I shuffled in bearing platters of rolls and hot bowls of boiling veggies, the two of them were speaking. The items that Gaius had described to us were put up for serve on a modest buffet along the back wall. He had forewarned us to be on time, alert, and silent. That our bodies should always be gone but our hands, in their odd white gloves, should always be there. Big Kit stood silently enraged, as if decrying the obviousness of her figure, clasping and unclasping her hands, and I could feel how uncomfortable she was. She was aware that our plot to kill ourselves would not be met with leniency. She made an effort to calm her expression, slowing to look within. Even though I was afraid, I couldn't help but gaze at the master's plate while he ate, imagining the sauces on it and the scorching, yellow crusts he dropped out of boredom. Never before had I been so close to the maestro physically. He appeared to be waxy and unwell, the same color as the hard cheese rind that was on the table in front of them, in the golden candlelight much as he had in the field. His skin was loose and worn out. A stench of damp paper appeared to emanate from his torso as I leaned down to pour the water while shaking my hands. His fingernails had dried blood under them, I noted. And still, my gaze kept returning to the second man. He would have been scary and gloomy in my imagination. Not at all. He had shoulder-length hair and was dressed in a dark blue frock coat. He had long, slender fingers with a jeweled ring on the index of each hand. His feet were wide and firmly planted beneath him as he sat, giving the impression that he may get up at any time. He didn't move at all when I poured the lukewarm water into his glass, but he did pause mid-sentence to flash me a frail smile. He spoke in a low voice while running a spidery finger over his huge, arched, and buttonhole-like nasal bridge. "I tried soaking iron filings in sulfuric acid. I've tried silk stockings and animal bladders. Papers bags, even some of the most absurd ones, to see if there was any truth to them. But, Erasmus, they were all abandoned with good reason. I believe that only hydrogen, particularly pure hydrogen, and canvas function so beautifully. Why, one can ascend to heights of 10 to 20,000 feet. It is simply amazing. The ground below is, well, God's earth, you know. The master continued to munch while without looking up from his steak. You haven't gotten up, though. Ah, no. No, not me. No, not yet. So you are ignorant. About it, I've read reports from others. And you think that vehicle will truly get you over the Atlantic? Yes, but I will need to conduct some test flights first. The boss muttered. Climbing Corvus Peak is terrible. The heat of the day won't suit you. The second man remained silent while having startling green eyes. The master now rose his face. I know you'll ask me whether I can spare several slaves to carry your equipment. What? The man with brown hair arched his brow. What? Man, speak out. The man raised his knife and fork over his plate while he stopped. The master looked at him. Instead, he responded, these potatoes are quite strange, do you not find? Although I really like our Hampshire white variety, the flavor is only adequate. Well, I'm glad you agree to defy tradition and eat at this smaller table. With the edge of the tablecloth, the master wiped at his lips. Erasmus, you take offense too readily. It's a potato. The master grumbled, my potatoes. Potatoes that I choose. Your desire has always been to ignore all of my choices. In this way, you and father have always been similar. Damnably critical. When the second man mentioned his father, I looked across at him in amazement. I didn't think he was related to the master in any way, but suddenly the similarities stood out to me like a watermark, the quick, vivid eyes, the curiously fat lower lips, and the way each guy punctuated some lines with a leisurely sweep of the hand, as if doing the action underwater. When the master saw the second guy looking uncomfortably over at Big Kit, he chuckled angrily. What? The sow? She can't be offended by my words. Christopher, she has no delicate sensitivities to irritate. The second man silently placed his knife and fork down. The master waved a sluggish, irritated hand and murmured, no matter. You were talking about how much better your air balloons are than your father's, and the vast heights you will achieve. They're not precisely air balloons, though. And yet. And you now desire enormous weights. The brothers' easy laughter was an odd sound. I do need another man to ride the machine with me. You see, for the ballast. You can't do it by yourself. And you need my enormous weight, right? The master had soured eyes. Erasmus, you are outstanding in all of your qualities. You're telling me I'm overweight, then? He stopped and looked into the master's eyes. Perhaps you need something lighter, she said. The master abruptly turned around and pointed to where I was standing. The water pitcher in my hands started to vibrate as I touched it. I feared looking into his eyes. Why don't you bring up a nigger calf? He ought to be thin enough. Allow it to be, Erasmus. Would that be advice or a suggestion? The man inhaled deeply and slowly. I'll never comprehend your need to find offense in anything I say. Only the two of us are present, and my visit is only temporary. Would we not enjoy our time more if we made an effort to understand one another? Do I not comprehend? The brother started to say, what you lack, but stopped and did not finish his sentence. I would not have this talk today, in front of the staff, he remarked instead. Titch, they are not the assistants. The furniture is they. The brother breathed out and rolled his eyes a little. You're overly sentimental, little brother. How on earth do you think you'll last a whole year here if you're already crying over swear words uttered before a nigger? Heavens! If father saw how soft you have grown, all of his respect for you would instantly go. Given your beliefs, why on earth did you persist on accompanying me to this miserable location? Do you want to abduct all of my servants while I'm sleeping? The man grinned indignantly. I've asked that you go. I was shocked to see the master start to chuckle and smile all of a sudden. I guess there is a little bit of a guy in you after all. Added Claret? I think he was really laughing. I realized then that I would never be able to understand the master since there was no sense to be had. He dropped a gradual red stain upon the white tablecloth while he was extending the claret decanter. I observed as it grew, pouring outwards like blood. Its deep crimson color struck me as both scary and gorgeous. But Big Kit, a tall, black shadow, moved stealthily forward and started immediately blotting the stain with a white towel. The master paid no attention. The brother breathed out loud. So far today, I've worn 3 shirts. It is a climate for the devil. The master's cheeks barely slightly puffed out. He hadn't really thought things through. This is hard labor. It calls for steel veins. What? The Easter Rebellion was it only 14 or 15 years ago? The entire terrible island was set on fire by niggers. The key is to be vigilant, Titch. Why, John Willard and I went up to the club this afternoon when we went into Bridgetown. The person at supper the previous evening? The chubby person with the flushed, perspiring face? No, the shorter one, the one with the yellow hair and the glasses. Although he was a bookkeeper at Drax, he became irritated there and, I believe, spent more time hunting out niggers than maintaining ledgers. He continues to have harsh remarks for the staff there. Why keep feeding a 50-year-old guy who is hardly able to stand when a 10-year-old youngster can cut twice as much cane? Added he. I believe Willard has a very frugal nature. He said that it is a waste issue. Indeed. Even the sight of a ledger can cause a nigger to skunk his drawers when a well-respected landowner walks out among his slaves carrying it. He himself has witnessed it. Boy, you. Would you defile yourself if you saw my brother here carrying a ledger? I felt the master's glowering gaze on me. Boy, he yelled. I didn't even raise my head. I agree, sir. The master made a frantic noise as though my response had offended him. My point is that if I don't have a little grit, mayhem will result. Christopher, it's my responsibility to add to the roughness. Your science is irrelevant to me as long as it does not affect how I manage the estate. The brother inquired, distractedly scrubbing at his plate. How far are we from Haiti? The first launch of a vessel of this type in the Americas, if I recall correctly, occurred from there. The master frowned and waited. Do you think I wanted to live my life in this way? Fighting niggers' filth and smelling like honey all day? The obligation did not seek me out, yet it still found me. Unlike you, Father does not favor me, therefore I am unable to go wander the globe conjuring up foolish contraptions. I truly have to fulfill my obligations to my family. The guy replied, You are the oldest, to Christopher. You are responsible for it, brother. The master's eyebrows furrowed as he replied, At breakfast. Something you said then. Do mother know you're here, please? The brother halted and fixed his gaze steadfastly on the master. You're aware that she'll lose her mind, aren't you? We have been together for this long, and you have said nothing. Throughout this period. You can't just keep vanishing on her like this, after all. What does she believe your location is? How am I to believe that I know what that lady thinks? Brother shook his head. Paris, maybe. London. I think I said that I was going to Grosvenor. The master giggled in distaste as he gave a weak head shake. She would have killed the concept in my mind, wouldn't she? And so you thought you'd just sail out and catch me at Liverpool? Simply like that? No word at all of notice? Occasionally, one has to little vanish. It is beneficial to the soul. Which soul? Mine, I assume. All this agony for your flying rag, damn you. The guy looked calmly at the master. Erasmus, it's not a rag. A cloud cutter, that is. And what function does it fulfill? Will it heal all of humanity's ailments? Will it free me from the restrictions of this abandoned island? While carefully keeping her eyes away, Big Kit continued to dab at the tablecloth stain until the master finally caught sight of her. He said, Leave off with it. Big Kit nervously made a couple more attempts to remove the stain. I said to stop. Half standing, the master grabbed for his plate and smacked Big Kit in the face with it. A loud snap was heard, followed by a large amount of blood and broken crockery. I suddenly felt my bones jolt up, and I managed to grab the water urn just in time. I fixed my attention on the master's hands and the freshly cut thumb. I wanted to go to Kit's side, but instead I just stood there holding the jug while the lemon seeds within made a clicking noise. The master wiped his hands on the tablecloth and said, Oh hell, I've cut myself. He turned and marched out of the room after dropping the broken plate. Mary! Mary! For the love of God, where are you? It was awful how silent it was. When Big Kit grabbed her face, I could hear the blood flowing down her fingers. The brother, the second man, paused. He finally got up and walked up to Kit while holding out his napkin. Drop your hands here. Big Kit put her hands down. Swivel your head. There. Like that. The guy passed his eyes over me as he wiped at Kit's face. He was taller than any white person I had ever seen, including Big Kit herself. He asked me, "What is your name?" Kit saw my pathetic expression as I met her steady, black eyes and quickly looked away. When I heard rustling at the doorway, I knelt down and started gathering the shattered pieces of the plate. I continued to focus on the jumble on the parquet. The master said, "For God's sake, Christopher, leave it. Don't embarrass yourself. They'll make it clean. What they do is it." Now, he appeared nearly delighted and at peace. "Listen, the tansies and custard will be there soon. I'm somewhat optimistic that they'll be usable. Come sit down, Guy." The nose of Big Kit was damaged. Never did I weep. Together, we silently wiped up her blood as I kept my eyes on the ground and watched as the master carelessly scraped the dirt from his shoes by walking over the parquet. The custards emerged with a sweet, toasty glow. The master ate heartily, but his brother threw his plate aside and asked for another glass of claret instead. As the night grew darker outside, I looked up to see our reflections there. They were bright and clear, and it looked like some other slaves were standing across from us looking unhappy and stone-faced. I looked for my eyes, but they were nowhere to be found in the white-gloved, motionless youth who took my place. Gaius gave us permission to sift through the partially consumed food that had been scraped onto a huge platter after the master and his brother had finally gone and we had helped clean out the enormous vats in the scullery and stack the boiling dishes to dry. I had lost interest in it, but Big Kit sent me an angry look before starting to eat quickly while using 2 forked fingers to scoop the food and chewing crookedly with one side of her lips. She would grimace as she did this, open her eyes in a furious state of astonishment, and then stoop again to pick up more food. I hardly tasted. I kept looking at her nose, not wanting to forget. She didn't begin to speak until Big Kit and I had already made our way to the huts under the glare of the moonlight. She snarled, "Don't you ever not take what's yours. That meal was promised to you. So you accept it. You shouldn't have been hit, Kit, by him."